Welcome to another edition of the Advisor's Guide to Estate Planning, where we're continuing in our series of interviewing advisors that have successfully implemented estate planning services for their clients and letting them share the best practices with you. Today, we are chatting with Jeff Clark, who's a partner at Pine Grove Financial Group in Woodbury, Minnesota. Pine Grove's an RA with a team of about 20 advisors and staff. Pine Grove was recently named by Forbes as the best in state wealth advisors. Jeff's a CFP and enrolled agent with a martial arts background that launched his financial services career with the incredible timing of just being a few months before the great financial crisis in 2008. Jeff, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, first I got to ask you about this. What area of martial arts that you competed internationally in South Korea? And I know it takes you, we'll go way back and start with all that context back in the day. Sure.
Yeah. So if you were to go on Wikipedia and look up Shimmudo, Simmudo, that's a martial art that was created by Song Pangong, and I was one of the first black belts in that art. And I was invited to do a demonstration in Seoul, South Korea.
That's cool. So you okay, what's unique about that art? Because
it's I'd say it's a combination of Taekwondo and Hapkido. So Taekwondo would be kicking, striking.
Okay.
And Hapkido is more joint locks, takedowns, and throws.
Okay.
Yep.
Interesting. I grew up as a wrestler and I had a Korean coach, and so who had a lot of judo background. And for years I have been putting it off, but I've been wanting to do some jujitsu and go into that. I just need that workout and so that's been one I've been wanting to do. So anyway, fascinating.
Sure.
I didn't know that's one I've never heard of. So thanks for sharing that. Now, also tell me on the other thing I introed here. Now, why did you choose to start a career in financial services like months before the great financial crisis? Seems like a terrible time to jump in.
I guess I just knew what was coming, right? I was in a cubicle and I was bored out of my mind. That's pretty much it.
Okay.
I went to school to be an actuary. So I was a mathematics major and found myself working for Allianz, and I just wanted to have the opportunity to meet with people face to face. I was the guy that would get out of my cube and walk around and keep everybody else from working. And
the actuary that actually liked people is that maybe it?
Yes, I was the most outspoken, outgoing person in all of my mathematics courses. So
that's great.
And at the time, my neighbor was working for a financial planning firm, and I took him out to coffee and just asked him, what do you do? And as he explained it, I thought, that sounds kind of fun. Actually, that sounds really interesting. And then I went in and they did a financial plan for me, and I got more interested. And then I eventually joined that firm, and I was off to the races.
That's amazing because, I mean, the beauty of that is generally math-minded folks, no offense to math-minded folks, aren't the best people. And so to have the skill of interpersonal along with math, you're a unique hybrid that's perfect for this business.
It's been really helpful.
That's awesome. And so kind of over the years, and as you transitioned or came to Pine Grove and launched into that RA space, tell us how in the world estate planning got on your radar as something that you felt was important to offer, and how you came to that understanding about what you wanted to build and how Encore fit into that.
I mean, it really goes back to the very first retirement plan I ever did before I got to Pine Grove, about maybe 10 years prior to that. So I had been a financial advisor for about 12 minutes, really had no idea what I was doing, but I was working through the CRPC, Chartered Retirement Planning Counselor, which is like the Cliff Notes version. Before you can take the CFP, you can use the credits towards it. And so I was working through that. And then, I mean, there's a whole long story that I'll skip, but I got a phone call from my mom that my dad was in an ambulance on the way to the hospital, and that he'd been in a severe accident on the farm. So we don't know exactly what happened, but there was a hoof print on his shoulder and his temple. So I assume he was kicked in the head by a steer, about an 800-pound animal. And it was about an 18-month recovery before his marbles were unscrambled. He had a hematoma form on the side of his brain and was rushed to Mayo Hospital.
Wow.
And I had not done a financial plan or a retirement plan really for anyone. At that time, I was kind of in an associate advisor role and just helping people facilitate setting up accounts, setting up insurance. So I knew aspects of financial planning like life insurance and long-term care and disability and how various things worked. But I wasn't doing full comprehensive planning. And fast forward about 30 days later, and my mom asks me, what do we do? What's the plan here? And I
Mm-hmm.
looked at her and I said, well, Dad was the plan,
Yeah.
and that changed my life.
Yeah.
Because there was no plan. I mean, he's fully recovered, mostly
Mm-hmm.
recovered now. I mean, the hematoma has come
Mm-hmm.
down. 18 months later, he got back to most function, but he was forced into retirement basically right then and
Wow.
there
Wow.
at the age of 58.
Wow.
And he's now just about 70. So
Wow.
it's been a while.
Wow. So when mom looks to you and says, what do we do here in
Yeah,
that 18 months and who knows how long it's ahead? Um, that's, I guess, growing up faster than you planned
a
in
little
some
bit.
ways.
Yeah. I mean, it was that humbling sense of panic of, I
Sure.
don't know. And
Yeah.
later, now I look back on it and I give myself a little bit of grace that nobody would know what
Mm-hmm.
to do
Mm-hmm.
because none of their financial life was organized in such a way that anybody would know what to do.
Yep.
So
Yep.
the first step was just Sherlock Holmes, trying to figure
Mm-hmm.
out, okay, well, Dad doesn't believe in computers. And so he didn't log in. He didn't have any passwords. There was no dashboards back then.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so we were just waiting for statements to show up in the mail to know what they owned.
Wow. Wow.
And we built like a financial scorecard piece by piece of what do you own and how does it work? And we designed a budget based on looking at bank statements and yeah, every element piece by piece.
Wow. So you kind of got thrown into the fire, which
Yeah.
is probably looking back.
Yep.
That had to have a massive impact on you. Obviously, personally,
Oh,
you're dealing with
absolutely.
the impact of just the personal side of that.
Yeah.
But then having the lens of that almost being your first plan in the business
Yeah.
of going, okay, seeing the two sides of it,
Yep.
where unless we've experienced it personally, isn't it amazing how much the conviction and that we
Hmm.
have and the understanding, the need. So how would you say that's impacted your growth as an advisor by that being your
I would say it's one of the best things that could ever happen to me
Mhm.
because
Dad's okay at the end of the day?
well, yes,
For sure.
absolutely. Yep,
Yeah.
I just saw him yesterday.
Oh, good.
But the probably the biggest thing is that immediately following that, I was in a role where I was expected to keep about 25 meetings a week with people
Hmm.
that were newly retiring this month. So
Okay.
I worked in a large broker dealer that received 401k rollover calls,
Okay.
and it was basically retirement planning in an ER like scenario.
Oh,
Get to know
wow.
you in the next 60 minutes, solve
Wow.
your most immediate problem, and help you get set, and then not remember who you are as you walk out the door.
Okay. Wow.
So I had to have a lot of conversations about retirement very quickly, which also helped
Hmm.
me grow up fast. But I had this experience leading into that. So what it did is it allowed me to start to notice, like, what would happen to you if you went through what my dad just went through
Hmm.
over and over again. And I started to develop a conviction around um, if you don't have the adequate guardrails in place to protect your financial plan, it doesn't matter what your plan is.
Yeah.
Like if you are the plan, that's a
Yep.
problem. And
Yep.
so anything that's humble enough to be all weather, so that regardless of what is thrown at you, you have the best possibility of success,
Mm.
that's a real plan.
There you go.
And so estate planning fits exactly into that because it's not just a check the box activity like a rite of passage. The kids are out of the house, so I guess we should probably do it again.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's more of a tool to empower the people you care about to do the things you'd want them to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because in that moment when that happened to my parents, I didn't have power of attorney. I didn't
Okay.
have healthcare directive.
Yep.
I didn't have a financial plan with an asset summary of any kind. And so, we were going through things like trying to get his company disability policy to pay out.
Mm.
Well, in order to do that, you have to communicate with the physician that diagnosed him as incapacitated. Well, that physician only shows up at that location on Tuesdays, and they have to
Mm.
sign a specific form that the disability carrier wants them to have. And I don't have HIPAA powers or
Mm-hmm.
healthcare or power
Yep.
of attorney.
Yep. Yep.
So I'm helpless. And at that
Yeah.
time, I didn't know what those words even meant,
Yeah.
which is what
Yeah.
my clients
You,
feel,
yeah, you go in and you learn when they
Right.
say no, because
Yep.
you need this.
Yep. And so I'm constantly thinking through a scenario like that and what would have to be in place to empower that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, and that story's so important because we do think of estate planning for death, but we
Yeah.
don't think about it for incapacity. And you came from even an insurance kind of background too, where we think about insuring our insurability and having some
Right.
sort of something in place. But it's
Yep.
that same thing with estate planning and getting those power of attorney, because if there's an incapacity or even dementia or other things, you can't even
Yeah.
get those documents in place. And it's not about death. These are living documents as well. And man, it sounds like you got the conviction of the power and need for that
Yep.
early on.
Yep. And then when I finally ended up at Pine Grove, and we started implementing the retirement health method, it fits right into that planning framework as a perfect fit.
Tell us about that. That sounds interesting.
So the retirement health method is a framework to identify the things that you can control and just check the box on everything that you have control over in this moment.
Okay.
So it starts with, we do a financial plan and assign a freedom score, which is just a trajectory. This is where you're heading. But then the next thing is to start testing the aspects of that plan to see, well, what could you do to improve that trajectory in this moment? And what's really powerful about that is you start to identify quickly that the actions you do have control over have a lot more impact than the things you can't control. So for example, I could work one more year. I could retire sooner or later. I could go from full-time to part-time to no time. I could take Social Security sooner or later, maybe do a different strategy with my pension. So that's all in it's an acronym, HEALTH, household
Okay.
income, expenses, allocation, longevity, taxes, and healthcare. So that's level one, that's income strategy. And then two would be expenses. So understanding how far can I push the bands of spending before I put myself at risk, and identifying my own specific margin of safety, that here's my budget. Maybe it's $7,000, $8,000 a month. But if I'd pushed it to 9, would I still be okay? If I went to 10, would I still be okay? And assigning a specific boundary for me, so I know if I cross that boundary, that's the danger zone. But more importantly, how much flexibility do I have for the water heater to go out, or to take a vacation, or give money to my kids? If you've never measured it, you have tremendous uncertainty over that number. So that's in the expenses. Then A is for allocation. So we look at how your portfolio is structured and what's the most efficient way to do it, with the end in mind of turning it into a resource for a lifestyle and not just trying to create the biggest pot of gold you can.
Yep.
And then the next is L for longevity, which goes into estate planning and risk management. And so because each of our clients do that, they have a risk management conversation every 6 months.
Okay. And so that's where you're bringing up at that stage of that conversation, both a new relationship as well as the existing relationships that you're specifically talking longevity. Break that down a little bit. How does that conversation go? What are you
So
digging in
I
on?
usually talk about it in the context of a succession-ready financial life,
Okay.
which is like, I think of it, when Dad got hurt, I had to grab the baton and I had no idea what to do. I had no instruction manual. Nothing was structured for my success. And so the first layer of it is, what would we have to do to structure your life so that your spouse could act fully independently if you were out of commission for 18 months, which is what happened to my dad.
Yep.
And that's a powerful conversation in and of itself. And so that'll usually lend into what if your kids were called to that role? What would they need to be successful? And after you were gone, what would they need to be successful? And what would that language look like? And, those sorts of conversations.
When you say that's powerful, unpack that a little bit. Is it just the things that you tear into, the meaning of them, and just kind of?
Yeah, well, typically in every family, one person likes, or at least they dislike money less than the other person. So over time, just by the natural flow of life, they start to adopt more and more responsibility in that area.
Yep.
And if they've been married for 20 or 30 years, one person pretty much handles all of it and the other person doesn't.
Yeah.
which means everything is structured for the way that that person who handles everything thinks about things.
Mm.
So if the other person has to try to uncover or make a decision or take action in some way, nothing's been organized to make it clean or clear for them.
Yeah.
So
You're
simple
talking to
things
me
like,
right now. This is still my,
yeah.
I'm one of those folks.
It can be simple things like how
Mhm.
the accounts are structured or putting a nickname on the account. Like
Yeah.
that's the emergency reserve. And
Yep.
then, every time the spouse that's worried about, are we okay, looks at their reserve and like, oh, okay, there's another
Yep.
6 months of expenses sitting right there, guaranteed. It's perfectly fine. Just little things like that, identifying what's that person's need, what for them to be able to identify and understand what they're seeing, and then organizing it for them, their benefit. Because then what you do is you end up putting the clients in your shoes. Because I, as the advisor, am trying to organize things for their benefit, but now I'm
Yep.
coaching them to organize things for their spouse's benefit and their kids' benefit.
Yeah. Is that here's what I'm maybe catching on to too in approaching the conversation that way, just from an incapacity and what would
Yeah,
happen. It's that seems like it's probably a lighter way to get into the estate planning
absolutely.
conversation than, hey, let's talk about your demise. Let's start there. Um,
Right, absolutely.
is that
Yep.
true? And tell me the effect of, okay, we've got them inching in a way that it isn't this devastating reality that we're having to think about immediately. It's just, hey, practicalities.
Well, you'll notice things like the spouse who's not specifically engaged in finances. That's
Hmm.
the part where they lean in.
Interesting. Yeah, that
That's
makes
the part
sense.
where they start to really engage and think, you know what, this is what I would want for my kids. This is the wedding money. This is the house down payment for them.
Hmm.
Um, I don't want to see them get a big inheritance late. I want to give them small inheritances along the way where I can be present to actually invest in the life that they're creating for themselves.
Yeah.
And then that can wrap into the margin of safety conversation and then back into the estate planning conversation too.
So the depth of the relationship, you're a math guy. You probably
Yeah.
naturally tend to be, I'm sure you don't, talk about standard deviation too often with
Oh
clients,
yeah.
but
We
even
start right with
though,
calculus right from the start.
but for that client that is unengaged on the investment side of it, or just isn't their thing,
Hmm.
you find the power of your relationship and trust and depth in the estate planning realm
Hmm.
deepens that. Is that fair to say?
Yep. I mean, we go through a traditional financial planning process that most everybody listening to the podcast
Sure.
probably goes through, where you have a
Yep.
discovery meeting and then you have an initial analysis, like a first draft meeting, and then eventually you come to a proposal. Say, based on everything you shared with me, here's my best ideas. In going between the initial analysis and proposal, in the initial analysis, I want to learn as much as possible and have them tell me what to put in that proposal. And then I'm reciting back to them the things that were important to them in
Yep.
household income, expenses, allocation, longevity, taxes, healthcare. And so I tell them what estate plan they want because they told me what estate plan they want.
Hmm. Yep. And so how do you introduce Encore into that? What's your way of saying they didn't come to you thinking they were going to get
Yeah.
an estate plan probably. And so now let's take action of the on this. Here are some options, attorneys,
Sure.
Encore. How do you
Yep.
present that?
So I plant the seed. It depends on how we met.
Hmm.
I do public seminars, and
Okay.
so a lot of them have taken my seminar, and the last section of that seminar is an estate planning conversation.
Okay.
And so it might have been planted there where they heard my story and went through that conversation. In the discovery session where we're getting to know each other, I'll bring up, here's what we, what to expect from a plan, and that'll mention aspects of estate planning as one of the pieces. But when I get to the initial analysis before I've even created a proposal, I'm talking to them about, in the estate planning section, do you have an estate plan? Are you familiar with the power of attorney, healthcare directive, and how those sorts of documents work? Are you familiar with the trust? I'll do a little education where I draw a picture of a pour over estate plan. And so
Okay.
here's what happens to assets that have beneficiary designations. Here's what happens to assets that don't. Here's how the will would play in a probate situation, and here's how that would pour over into a trust and skip that situation. And so I just kind of draw out the different documents visually, so they're like we're all on the same page about what we're talking
Hmm.
about, and just ask them, are you familiar with these pieces? Do you have these aspects? And then depending on the complexity of their situation, that's what lends into Encore. So I'll tell them that we have a number of different solutions to help you get this done. So we work with a local estate planning attorney, and he typically handles our more complex scenarios. So that would be, where there's all of the exclusionary questions that would be in the Encore module.
Yep.
And if their situation doesn't fall into one of those, then I'd say, well, then you also qualify for this solution. That estate planner charges $3,000 for a plan. We usually charge $1,425, but we will include it for free if you onboard with Pine Grove.
Okay.
So we make it part of the proposal.
Would you say that estate planning component, it's part of a bigger picture, but would you give it credit for actually bringing on assets and being a part of the asset growth at Pine Grove in positioning it that way?
Yep, absolutely. Because it's leadership. I mean, we're actually leading them through things that they want to do. They just hadn't had any education on what those elements were, how to structure it, or a means to facilitate it in a reasonable way.
Yeah.
I mean, my very first estate plan, I went through traditional situation where I sat down with an attorney and he drafted all my documents. And it was such a messy situation, and I was so confused at the end of it. I didn't understand what I had and what to do with it and why it was useful. And the module that we go through, it's so straightforward. I mean, it's a 45-minute conversation at the most. And that's if I haven't sent them the healthcare questions in advance to think about. Otherwise, it's a 15-minute, 20-minute conversation, really.
Yeah. What are those things that you use to prep them? Okay, let's roll on this with Encore. What is your, these are the things you need to think about ahead of time prior to us sitting down. Cause it looks like you've done advisor driven and facilitated. What do you send over?
So typically it's just the healthcare questionnaire. And then a document, it's called What to Expect. And I think it actually is from Encore directly. And then it just has the Pine Grove letterhead on it. But it explains what all the elements that would be included in a plan are. And then it also has the healthcare questions and then explanation behind what those healthcare questions would be. And then we just have a conversation about each of those pieces as we go through the module. Very conversational. And we're just exploring the concepts together.
Yeah, and you've already nailed it, kind of the educational piece. It sounds like you've got that dialed even from your beginning conversation of, I'm just going to educate you, you're going to decide, and you're comfortable walking that realm and setting that expectation, it sounds like. So out of that, then what's your process from, okay, everything's submitted to Encore. Are you even pre-filling the questionnaire at all ahead of the meeting? It sounds like even if you're doing 15, 20 minutes, you're pretty dialed with the software and getting it in as they answer it and prepping them well.
I mean, I can type pretty fast. And they're sitting right next to me. So like, okay, no, my daughter's name is spelled with 2 S's, not 1. And I reconfirm every element of it as we go, sending them a summary after the fact so they can reconfirm everything is accurate. But yeah.
And then once documents come back, are you setting the kind of next meeting to review the document with them? You sharing that document out to them, having them kind of review it on their own? What's your...
So I send them the estate planning summary email, but other than that, we've already talked through all the aspects of it. So we go ahead and just schedule a signing party here in the office.
Perfect. Okay.
And we have a number of notaries here. Okay. And so that meeting is probably a little bit longer, maybe 45 minutes at least.
Okay.
And we go through each piece of it. And if they want to review it in advance, I always offer to send it to them. But oftentimes they say no.
So your review meeting is okay. We've got you here. We're reviewing it. They green light everything. It is what they want. If they change their mind, obviously we can help you with that, but we'll create the new documents and redo the signing. And so from there, how often do you review or come back to that? Is this, I think you said every 6 months or a year you're running this whole process?
So I'm working with about 230 families directly.
Okay.
And so part of my process, just to make sure that we're not missing things, is I have a checklist of conversational items that come up in every meeting. And estate planning is one of those bullet points that we check. And so the first thing that I check is that it's the estate plan on file. And the second thing I check is if it is on file and has been completed recently, has it been implemented? Have you re-registered your non-qualified assets into the name of the trust? in Minnesota? Have you named the trust as a beneficiary on your title? Various aspects like that. So every 6 months, it's a conversational topic, and it's not
Okay.
like we got to tackle it today,
Yeah.
but we touch on it every 6 months, and eventually they raise their hand and say, you know what, we got to do that thing you've been telling us to do.
Yep. Yeah, I kind of think about this sometimes, like call it state planning versus state preparation. There's those
Yeah.
preparation details that, yes, let's make sure we're funded. It sounds like that's what you're doing on that regular basis, that you're coming back to making sure you're checking the boxes on beneficiary designations, the funding.
Yep.
We've probably helped them get their house in the name of the trust, but if you leverage that with us, but there's still the account names and beneficiary designations that you're kind of following up through.
Yep. And also a reminder that they have it, or introducing them to tools like, and I don't know if Encore will maybe create a version of this, but Everplan, if you're
Yeah,
familiar with that tool.
I'm familiar with it. Yep.
Yep. So oftentimes I will buy a copy of the If You Get Hit by a Bus book and give
Okay.
it to them. And then
Okay.
if they have the receipt, they get a free year of
Okay.
Everplan.
Yeah. Okay.
And then we've
Great.
got the documents already signed in our office, notarized, and turned into a PDF so that we can just give them the secure file to upload to Everplan.
That's awesome. Yeah. Everplan's a great tool. And so I'm glad, thanks for bringing that up. I'm glad to hear that's one people should look into. It makes a lot of sense in partnership with Encore and from what we do on kind of on the front end, getting the documents, but making sure all those other pieces are wrapped up and that gift. Now, what do you think from a generational kind of impact that you're able to have here? Because you've been the second generation when you had that incapacity experience. And how do you see that in your relationships potentially with the next generation of your clients and the impacts there?
I think because the nature of our planning process is constantly addressing the succession readiness of your plan,
Okay.
that I have a number of clients that are naturally volunteering to me. My kids are entering a phase of life where they probably need an advisor. Can you help? And when I reached about 170 households, I brought on an associate advisor who sits in all my meetings. And I mean, he's phenomenal, but he now takes the lead on all of those relationships. And he has his own version of the retirement health method for accumulators.
Okay.
And walks them through a process. And so their financial plan can be coordinated with their parents.
That's awesome. Yeah, and especially as parents, and maybe if your clientele is more grandparent level, that they know their kids need these documents in place for their grandkids to protect the grandkids and those decisions made. And so
I've seen
that's
it also
probably
with
led to opportunities.
Aging parents.
Okay.
Where they have a parent that's aging and they're starting to realize that I don't know what's going on, but they don't know what's going on either, and maybe I need to help them and start to figure that out.
Yeah.
And so they refer their parents to us.
Yep.
And sometimes in that situation, we might just do a powers plan, just to get powers in place.
Yep.
And then that starts a financial planning conversation and managing assets for long, late life healthcare needs and.
Interesting. Yeah, that goes perfectly. That's fascinating that instead of saying, hey, my mom and dad need a full-fledged estate plan, let's just get something in place, and they're maybe not your client, but what's an easy way to help your client not get in that situation you were in? Let's at least get the powers only for your parents, that you have the power of attorney, healthcare directives, and that can create more of a conversation. But that's maybe a simple path to taking wading into the waters. Yes, they probably need a trust or a will-based plan, part of that too, but it's easier to maybe get launched with that powers only, and you can solve for that pretty quickly.
It also solves an immediate and practical need, which is if they talk to any financial institution, it mum's the word, you have no authority to do anything without that document.
Yep.
And now you have that document, you can have conversations around what do you have going on? What does your budget look like? Actually, you're okay. Because I've never known, mom and dad, I didn't know you were okay, but now I do know you're okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I can actually help you manage things, which can then lead to a full-fledged estate plan potentially, but.
Yeah. So overall, would you say the estate planning components, obviously I've heard from you that it's deepening relationships. I'm now hearing referrals. And so, but obviously at the bottom line, the time you're investing in this, you're charging a fee, it sounds like, for your time in facilitating it. But overall to your business, do you feel like it's had a pretty substantial effect on obviously the bottom line as well for your efforts and bringing it
Oh,
in.
absolutely. I mean, when I joined Pine Grove back in 2018, I had no assets, and I
Okay.
have 230 million today.
Okay.
And that's not from purchasing outside practices or anything. That's organic
Organic
accumulation
growth.
from doing seminars and then being referred to people who were in seminars.
Way to go. That's incredible.
And I credit a lot of it to that succession ready framework and the retirement health framework
Yeah.
of how to answer the question, am I okay?
That's awesome. So what that is, 6 years from
Yep,
0 to
6 years.
230 million under management. That's what I
Yeah.
think I heard.
Yep.
That's incredible. Way to go. That's awesome. We're
Thanks.
thrilled that you've partnered with us and we get to be a small part of your success in enabling a piece of that. And so,
Well, you know, the magic sauce with the Encore tool is that, you know, I learned this when I was working in that large broker dealer and I had to do kind of quick financial plans over and over and over. I needed a process to be able to quarterback the situation, but delegate the implementation. And so, like with our investment management, use a third-party asset manager that manages portfolios, rebalances every 30 days, tax loss harvest. I mean, it's phenomenal. We use the same thing with annuity and insurance business. We use a third-party fiduciary arm that handles all of that business for us, but I delegate that. And then when it comes to taxes, we have a CPA firm that prepares returns, and I'm a tax advisor, so I can give advice on taxes, but I don't prepare any returns. And then with Encore, same thing. It's a third-party estate planning manager, and I go through a meaningful conversation, and I get immediate results. I mean, within 5 to 7 business days, we've got documents that we can do something with, and we can review them together and actually implement them. And it's just an immediate peace of mind that, oh, we checked that. We didn't just check that box, but we've got the context around how do we use the tools within that plan to actually accomplish something important.
That's awesome. Thanks for articulating that, because that's what I've always believed. It's the family office for the mass affluent. You're the quarterback. You don't need to have the depths of expertise in every aspect of this. You'll have your strengths and areas you're stronger in than others. But if you have the right partner and software and teams, it even sounds like that, you can be the quarterback and facilitate all this and have it be efficient in managing that many households as well, and continuing to grow. So that's awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing those insights. I'll finish this up with kind of one last question I'll throw at you. That as advisors like hearing from each other, is there a podcast out there, a new piece of technology you found recently, or a person you follow that has impacted you both professionally or personally, that you'd want to share with everybody on maybe what you've built, how you built it, but something that's out there that you'd like
I'd
to
say
share
one
with
of the
everybody?
best resources is probably Kitces, Michael Kitces' podcast, or Nerd's Eye View. I've followed that content for years, and that led to what inspired me to leave the large broker-dealer world and join a small RIA and start from zero and build a practice.
Yeah, I looked at your LinkedIn. So I saw those iterations. Every couple of years, you figured out there's a better way to do this.
That's how I heard about DPL, which is our third-party annuity manager, and 55IP, our third-party asset manager.
That's awesome. Well, cool. Well, thanks for sharing, taking the time. We really appreciate advisors who are willing to kind of pull back the curtain and share their best practices, how you do what you do, and the impact of it. Because, you know, just what you've learned on the Kitces podcast for years, hearing other advisors, you know, you never know those little nuggets you pick up, and thank you for being willing to pass some on to those who are uncovering, should I be doing more in estate planning? How do I do it? Advisors who are a few years ahead on that road, your insights are incredibly valuable. So we really appreciate you coming to the podcast and sharing.
Thanks for having me, man. I hope it helps give somebody the courage to pursue it.
Absolutely, it will. And that's kind of what it takes sometimes, is just that little bit of, okay, I can do this. Others are doing it. And so those are the pieces. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in to the Advisor's Guide to Estate Planning. We really appreciate the support. Remember to subscribe, leave a review, share with colleagues and friends. For questions or feedback, email us at info@encoreestateplans.com. Thanks again, Jeff.
Thank you.